But we're here to talk about the Grand Slam, which gets underway in Wolverhampton this Saturday. 9 days of darts. We've got a few big names missing from the field, which we'll come on to talk about in a moment. But how wide open do you think this year's Grand Slam is going to be?
It certainly has a degree of wide openness. I mean, if you look at the most recent major tournament, it was Ross Smith, who was 300 or 200 to 1 before the weekend started. And he went and won the entire thing, and deservedly so. But on the other side, it's less wide open than it was last year or the year before. And most of that, or almost all of that, is because Michael van Gerwen is playing at a much higher standard than he was playing at 12 months ago to the day. If Michael van Gerwen is playing better, if Michael van Gerwen is more difficult to beat, especially when we get into the later rounds. Granted, he could lose 2 matches in the group stage that are short format, but once we get into the later rounds, it's first to 10 in the last 16, it's first to 16 in all the other rounds. And those longer matches, if Michael van Gerwen is averaging even just in the high 90s, it's going to be challenging to beat him. And the number of players who, I won't say are capable of beating him, because everyone in the field is still capable of beating him, but the number of players who are more likely to beat him over a longer format is greater than it used to be, but it's still not that high overall. And therefore, he's more likely to win it than it was a year ago. So I don't think it's as wide open. But the number of players who can, at the end of the day, lift the title, and it might not be all that surprising, is still pretty much half the field. And there's a lot of players who will be thinking they can get out of their group. And once they get out of their group, anything can happen. And there'll be people in Michael van Gerwen's group who will be thinking they can knock him off. Ross Smith, of course, just won a major. Nathan Rafferty fears no one. Luke Woodhouse, you'll hear from him later. He struggled at times this year, but he did win through the qualifier, and he did get a few results over the last couple of weeks to make sure he got to the World Championships after it got a little hairy near the end. So there'll be players who are thinking they can knock him out at that group stage. But at the end of the day, if Michael van Gerwen is playing well, it doesn't mean he's not beatable, but it means he's less likely to be beaten. And the less likely he is to be beaten, the less wide open the tournament is. So compared to the last couple of years, it is less wide open, but there's still potential for a surprise winner or a not so surprise winner, but still someone who we might not have been expecting at the start of the week.
Yeah, it seems like a fair question to ask, and an appropriate time as well. As you mentioned, we're only a week or so removed from Ross Smith winning the European Championship as that big outsider pre-tournament, and what a run he had to the title as well. And I think he's 33 to 1 to go back-to-back major titles if you fancy that next week. But obviously, yeah, you've got the big 3 at the top of the outrights: Michael van Gerwen, Gerwyn Price, Peter Wright, not necessarily in their world ranking order, but the top 3 in the order of merit for a little while now. They've been the top 3 in the betting heading into these major events. And then you've got that pool of players around 11 to 1 to 22 to 1 range that people will fancy as well. But I think with this event as well, and I caught a bit of the final with snooker's version of this, the Champion of Champions at the weekend on ITV, the final, and a similar event to this one, just on a smaller scale with 16 players, but players that have won events in the last 12 months. And they mentioned that some players, they qualified for the event almost a year ago, and you've got that here with Ryan Searle qualified in November last year, Ted Everts, Nathan Rafferty, who you mentioned, the World Youth finalists from last November, and then you've got a lot more recently, the 8 players that come through that qualifier on Sunday to get through. So it does make for probably one of the more unique fields that you get in a 32 player event on TV in the PDC. All 32 have earned their spots via various routes, but you'd say that, are these the 32 best players in the world right now? Probably not. There's some big names missing, but we speak of the big 3, and I think it's only once in the last 7 years that we've seen a final that's not featured one of them, or one of them have won the title. You think Jose de Sousa winning it in 2020 behind closed doors, but the last 6 times that we've had this event with a crowd in Wolverhampton, either at the Civic Hall, which must be going through the longest renovation work in history at the moment, or the Aldersley Leisure Village, whatever you call it. The last 6 times we've had it in Wolverhampton, Michael van Gerwen or Gerwyn Price have won the title. Peter Wright's made 3 finals. So, yeah, you are going to get some surprise results. The group stage, okay, it gives every player 3 games. You can afford to slip up. But I think most of the time you do get the 8 seeds, or 7 of the 8 seeds, they make it through. You might get the odd 1 or 2 miss out some years, but I think having the 3 games, it does kind of take the pressure off a little bit of the big boys to get through. They don't have that pressure right out of the gate where win or you're out of the tournament. So I think that does help the top players get through, and once they get to the knockout stages, they've had that game time on the stage. So for me, yeah, I think out of all the events we have, this is probably one of the least wide open. But on the other side of things, we've just seen a week or so ago Ross Smith win a title, and a lot of people saying he's the most surprising winner. So could it happen again? Could we get someone big odds win one of these titles? Of course we could, but I think you're probably looking at one of the big boys that are going to be there at the end picking up the title for me.